Let's go ahead and start. Yep. This is kind of a follow-up to a video I did last week where a user had a question about summing some data when it's not really laid out in the best way, and I talked to Adam, who's another Docs TC, and we kind of came up with a solution, and I talked about it, and then afterwards he watched the video and he said, there's a bunch of other ways we could do this too, and I think it'd be really interesting. So we're going to go ahead and go through some of these ways again. So I'm going to start out with explaining what we did before. So the question was, I have data in odd-numbered rows, and I have some numerical value in even number rows, and I'd like to be able to sum all the values under a certain name. So I'm going to share my screen here so you can see. So here's how the layout looks. We have names, so I'm using Ted and Adam here in odd-numbered rows, and then in even-numbered rows we have some sort of numerical data. And the question was, well, how can I sum the data under my name? And so the solution we originally came up with was using sumproduct. And click here, you can see the formula in here. So sumproduct basically creates two arrays and multiplies them together, and then adds up the numbers you've multiplied together. So you can look at my blog post to see a really easy example of this. Just using numbers, but this is basically how it works. So to visualize what's going on here, the first part of the function, basically we need to be able to multiply numbers together. So we can't multiply text times some number. So like Ted times 5, well, that's just nothing. We can't figure that out. So in order to convert it into a number, we use this end function. So basically, in the end function, you put in some criteria. If it meets the criteria, you get a 1, yay. If it doesn't, you get a 0. So if we multiply anything by 0, we'll get a 0. Multiply anything by 1, we'll get 1. So that's the first step, is creating the first array to figure out what values we actually do want to multiply and then sum together. So to visualize this, we'll click here. So here's what the first array looks like. So if you look up here, it's the n of all this data here. So wherever we see Ted over in this array here, we'll get a 1. Wherever we don't see Ted, we'll get a 0. So we should see 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, and so on. So we see 1, 0, 0, 1, and so on. So that's the first array that's created in the sum product. The second array is created. It's the same from the same data, but we're just shifting everything down so that the 5 will go next to Ted here. So here's what the second column looks like. So we get all the data. Now this doesn't matter because we're going to be multiplying by 0 anyway. And so here's the multiplication that goes on. So we're multiplying 1 times 5, we get 5. This errors out, so the way that what sumproduct does, it doesn't even put anything there. Here, we're treating it like it is by putting if error. So if there's an error, nothing shows up is what's happening. So 0 times Adam is error, so nothing shows up. 0 times 10 is 0 until we get to the next one. So here, 8. And so basically, this is the final step of what sumproduct does, and then it sums up all these numbers and we get 34. So if we go back here, that's what we wanted, 34. So just to show this here, if I change this to Adam, we get 30, which is what sumproduct says we should get over here at 30. So the first thing Adam noticed was, well, we could really do this with sumif. So Adam, if you want to take over here and kind of explain how you can do this with sumif really easily.
Sure. It was just quite embarrassing, really. Sumproduct was really overthinking the problem, as it were. Although, as Ted and I later discussed, there's some situations where sumproduct would come into its own where sumif won't work. But sumif, in this case, is probably the more straightforward way of doing it. So if you can click on my screen share now, in my editing window, we just have sumif A1 to A19. If it equals C1, then we sum A2 to A20. So again, just if we were to visualize it over here, A1 to A19, A1 to A19, Control-Shift-Enter. So we populate these values here, A2 to A20, Control-Shift-Enter. We're just lining them up like Ted with the sum product, except we're using sumif. And it won't break due to these rows in between, because the sumif will miss the numbers here and not try and sum text. We're summing. Hello, Jill. All of the terms in A1 to A9 are equal with the corresponding pattern. And that's that. I mean, some product's pretty cool, as Ted will show. There's another application where we might not necessarily have just one value underneath. We could have two, and in that case, sumif may not work. So I'll hand over to Ted there.
All right. So when we were talking, we were saying, well, why would we rather use sumproducts instead of sumif? So we came up with another solution for using sumproduct. So this was kind of the layout of the original question, but now, instead of having one number under Ted, we now have two numbers. So sumif, this really wouldn't work because we'd have a bunch of ranges next to each other with numbers, and we'd have to redo the formula every time we wanted to do it. So let me extend this out a little bit. We can see that there. So, so the question here that I wanted to answer was, so how much did each person sell each week? So basically, we know how many we sold. What did I get? I think I did them at 50 cents a shot. And so it goes through, it multiplies these two numbers together, then finds Ted and sums it. And it does the same thing for Adam. So Adam, you killed me, it looks like, here. But so to show how this works a little bit, I'm going to throw this over here. So if we look at the function again, it's sumproduct, that first array, that so we're looking at Ted, Adam, all the values here that are names. Then the second array that we're lining up is we're starting here. Let me scroll over here. With all the amounts is the first in the column. Then the third array here that we're creating is the profit. So how we end up tricking it here is, so here's the first array, which right now everything's 0 because I haven't typed in a name that we want to do. So let's check. We'll check Ted to make sure Ted is right here. So what's happening now is every time it sees Ted over here, we get a 1. So that means, okay, now we can do our multiplication. So Ted's in the first row, so we get here, Ted's down here, here, and here. It sums it all up, and we get this number, which is what we expect to see here. So just to explain it one more time, we'll throw Adam in here. So again, the first array is looking for, is starting with, that we're really concerned with in the first array is the names of the people. The second array, we're concerned with the amounts. And the third array, we're concerned with the profit. So whenever we're multiplying, so here's a name, whatever name or whatever amount goes with this name, it's going to be here, and the profit goes here. So you can kind of visualize, you have it stacked up vertically, and it kind of throws it horizontally. Kind of makes more sense that way, I think. But so we look at Adam here. So here's all the Adams, and 34,900. Yep, that's correct. And I just threw this here just for fun, so that if those numbers are equaling, that you can see that, yeah, actually this does make sense. So this is just kind of a visual representation of what the sum product is doing, why we would use it in this case.
The beauty of sum product in this case, Ted, is like you said before, if you attempt to, as in row 4 there, if you highlight that one, if you attempt to multiply 25 by Adam, it won't error out. It's sort of got that if-error functionality built into it, as it were. And where if you were to use a sum formula or an array formula and you multiply it, and you'd get a value error at the end of it. So sum product just gives you a little cheat that will conveniently ignore when you're trying to multiply text by numbers. The other thing I'd add is that if you scroll over to column A, if you were just adding two amounts, like if you had name, amount 1, amount 2, $50, $75, you could just add two sumifs together. This is a special case where you'd really need to, because we're multiplying, you'd resort to sumproduct.
Yeah,
good job.
So then we thought, well, how can we make this really awesome? And Adam knows a ton about query, so he came up with a pretty cool query answer, which he might explain here. It's kind of complicated, but it works, and it shows the power, I think, of Google Spreadsheets versus Excel. You can't really do something like this in Excel. So Adam, if you want to talk about this, I don't know how much detail you want to go into it, but
yeah, well, I mean, absolutely, it demonstrates what the power that G-Sheets have over other spreadsheet applications. It's no other application I know of you can just type in one formula here and populate a little table. And that's the beauty of query. I probably won't go into the details of query. I think the help article is very good, particularly the link within the help article which describes the GViz language quite well, language syntax in particular. The point being that we can create these sort of pivot table type outputs with one formula, albeit quite complicated, but I was just going to talk through some of the parts of this formula, and I've left it in a little text box here so we can see it as we go. So really, the whole point of the problem here is that we've got all the data in one column rather than in two columns, which query likes, and that's what we have to convert it to, and that's what this if statement in the middle of the in the first argument of the query does. It creates a two-column array. So if we were to go if, and this just gives us our help docs for if test, the second argument is returned if that test is true, and the third argument is returned if that test is false. We can use an array for that test. So if true, false, I've used curly brackets here to create what's essentially a two-column array. The comma is a column separator. Be careful in certain locales that use a comma for a decimal, you need to use a backslash, so certain European and Latin American locales. But what this is saying is that whatever is in the second argument of this if function is returned in the first column, and whatever is in the second argument, right, is returned in the second column. So if I have to Control Shift Enter this because we'll wrap it with an array formula. We get this. So we've used one formula to create two cells, and that's just driven, or the engine to make this happen is the true false here. Now you'll see Yogi use this a lot on the forums. We usually go a bit shorthand and go 1, 0. So if will accept numbers as those arguments as well. If it's a non-zero number, that's equivalent to true, and if it's 0, that's equivalent to false. So it gives us the same output. Then we take it a step further and we can actually create our columns. So A1 to A19 and A2 to A20. Again, with one formula, we've created this two-column output. So at this point, we can try and wrap it in a query statement.
Let me just stop you right
Sure.
there real quick. Just if you can, hold on, I'll share. So people who aren't really familiar with query, so basically what he just did was the first attribute of query is you have to define what you're actually querying through. And so if you look at what we're going to query through, it's this whole section here, which is really very similar to what we created, here, not with the zeros, but when we were making our sum products before. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, you're right. Thanks, Ted. So just back on my screen share. So I've just wrapped that output we've created with that if statement, as Ted said in the first argument, in a query. We've done a simple query here, select column 1 and 2, select everything. What query does, if it decides it wants to see one data type in each column. So in this case, either text or values. if the first, and this is the way I interpret query, if the first entry in a column is a value, it'll regard that whole column as values and effectively ignore all the text, which is good. It suits our purposes because we want to ignore every second column in this little array I created. There is a catch. If we were to make it auto-expand for the whole spreadsheet and make this A1 to A99 and A2 to A100, here it will always sort of default to making it a value column if there's the same number of values as there is text. So the trick that I've had to use here in the original formula is append a double quote to make that whole column text. And then we go back to what we want, Ted, Adam, with all these values converted to text, but they will be ignored in the next part of the query select. So this is where the magic of query occurs. We just start eliminating the rows that we want. So we eliminate all the rows that in column 2 have no value in them. So where column 2 is not null, and bang, we've just condensed our table into the format that we want. Ideally we'd like our data laid out like this in the first place, and that's what Ted will discuss in a moment, but we've done this within the formula in this case. But we actually want to group these values and sum them per person. So column 2 will actually go sum column 2, where column 2 is not null, and then we have to group by column 1. And voila, and we've got Adam and Ted. Now, whenever there's an aggregation like sum, it'll automatically give you a little column header. We can get rid of that by going, label sum column 2 nothing. And there we go. And one other tip with query I'll just throw in is that there's actually an optional third argument. A lot of people post on the forum and run into troubles with this. The third argument says how many header rows are in the original data or in the source data. If you don't specify that argument, some processor in Mountain View will guess it. Usually it guesses right, but sometimes it guesses wrong and you get unexpected results. In this case, this array that we created that we're querying doesn't have any header rows, so best practice would probably just to put 0 at the end, which I've done here, which says there's no header rows and we avoid unexpected results. So that's the query way of doing it, and it auto expands, like we can write anything down here and it should automatically populate these tables. We can delete rows, or we hopefully can delete rows, and it still works. I won't go into the offset bit, Ted. I think we might move on. But that's just a way of accommodating auto-expanding sheets with form submissions and what have you. But as we said, the whole idea is probably to lay out your data better in the first place. Hey, Ted.
Yeah, I think the first part here we're mostly talking about what can spreadsheets do when you have data in all these different formats, and why would you much rather use Google Spreadsheets than maybe in Excel, and these formulas like query, array formula makes everything really easy to work. You can do array formulas in Excel. I think it's a little bit more cumbersome and difficult to really figure out, but G-Sheets makes it very easy. But the second part here I want to talk about is mostly how important it really is to set up your data in a friendly way in terms of analyzing it. You talk to people sometimes and say, do I have a spreadsheet or do I have a table? And really, a table, some people use spreadsheet programs basically as a table because it's easy to type numbers in boxes, and then they'll look, okay, there's a 10 and a 5, that's 15, I'll type 15 in the box. And really that's not taking advantage of a spreadsheet. That's really just basically a table in some sort of like Word or even in Google Documents. But so whenever you're doing something with data or anything, it's really important to think about, okay, what are you going to be doing with it at the end of the day, and how can I set it up so that when I'm doing my analysis, it's really easy. I'm going to show two sheets here. of okay, so we're going back to this. So if you look at how this data was set up before, we're looking here, hopefully we can see this. So we have dates in this first column, and then there's nothing here below it until we get to the next date. And so we have these chunks that really represent these dates, and really that's not the best way to do it. You want to have a date and then all your data that goes with a certain date. Or you want to have a person's name and then all the person's name that goes, or all the data that goes with that person's name. And the reason you do this is because you can do pivot tables. Adam mentioned them earlier, and you really can't pivot on data set up like this, especially when you have these blank cells here because there's no data in them, and the pivot table can't really go out to your data and find values that it needs to pivot on. So I always say whenever we're setting up data, we want to have as much data as we can in columns. So we have a column for, let's see, which one do we want to look at here? So looking at this, this is how I would have set it up. So the first date, was the 20. Can I make this bigger here? So the first date was the 21st of May, and on that date, I sold 50 units at $25 of profit. So this makes it really easy because I can easily write, a sum, multiply these numbers together, and then I can do a sumif because of the way the data is laid out. And so if you think about, forms, at least that's one great thing about Google Spreadsheets is you can use Google Forms. And if you look at how form data comes in, it comes in like this. You have a question where you're asking for some certain data, and it all comes in a column below it, so that it's all laid out horizontally for you, so that you can easily do any type of analysis you want. And most spreadsheet functions, you can do things where things are laid out vertically, but most people we're used to in the world of looking at data as it comes in, row by row, and we're all used to, in the first column is kind of the most important identifier of the data that you're looking at. So, in Google Spreadsheets, depending on what version you're on, your first column might be your timestamp, and it might be really important to figure out, when that data actually came in. Or it might be by username if you're on an apps domain where you can collect your users' usernames as they're filling out your forms. And this might be really important if you want to see, what users are saying what. Or if you're doing like a quiz or a test or something, and there's ways to make sure that they only submit it once, where you can, when you're doing your analysis and you're grabbing, your data from a certain row, you can look for the most recent entry by that person and take that grade, if you will, for thinking of it like taking a quiz. We get that question a lot. Yeah,
it would depend on the use case, I guess, too, Ted. Like you might be importing data off the web where you've got no option. I mean, they'll just lay out the data vertically, like you had. Maybe that's how it arose in the first place. And then you've got to make a decision: do I just want to crunch these numbers quickly? In which case, you might use one of the formulas that we did first up, or do I want to create a spreadsheet that I'm going to use ongoing, in which case you'd convert it to a better layout like this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I know I see a lot of questions on the forums about, how do I get this answer? And it really comes down to, well, how do you lay out your data? What are you really looking for?
And do you want a result now, and just get a result, or do you want something ongoing? Yeah.
Right. It's also, thinking towards the future. Like you're right. This is something that someone's going to want to use in the future that they can easily go through. I'm working on a project right now where I'm grabbing data from PDFs, and it's really difficult to grab data from PDFs because when the lines don't line up, you get things in all these different rows, and so it's taking a long time to do this. Now, if the data was set out normally like it should be in a spreadsheet, it would be so much easier. So I think it's really important to think about when you're creating, doing projects for things, or anything that you're going to use data with. And so when we created this here, we tried to take the data that originally existed. Let's see if I can go. So we took basically this whole column here, and in our better layout, we only used formulas to come up with this. So it's definitely possible. It took us a while. There's a lot of tricks and stuff that we had to do to get it to work. We're not going to go into it now because it's not really important for this, but it just kind of shows how powerful Google Spreadsheets is, especially when this example here of applying the array formula to a VLOOKUP, but you can also do it with an HLOOKUP. Um, and then, let's see, what's this other, I don't remember this one. Do you remember what this one was for? Oh, this is, okay, you just use a different formula to get the data.
Just different way of skinning the cat. But the point being that there's lots of ways of doing it. You may do these complicated formulas or get help with the formula and then convert it to values and then use that as your raw data from then on. But yeah, there's ways of generating these tables.
And one last thing I want to point out is, sometimes you'll see, I think it's really cool in the forums where a user will ask a question and 3 or 4 of us will give completely different answers, some being really complicated, some being really simple, and the answers are always the same, the end result. And I think that also shows how powerful things are, that there's also a lot of different ways to always do these things. So if you see one answer someplace and a different answer somewhere else, you're all getting the same result.
Go with yogis.
You're right. Exactly. So I have my own theories as to what formulas I like using and why I'm using them, and I know Adam and Yogi both do the same. And so that's not something to be afraid of as well. But in cases like this, going back to the original example, the sumif just really doesn't work with data like this, and I think it's just reiterate again how important it is to think about how much easier this could have been if the data was laid out, in a very organized manner.
Cool.
Adam, do you have any parting thoughts?
No, I think you'll have this spreadsheet public so people can have a look. It's linked in your blog, right?
Yeah, so it's linked in my original blog post. We used the same spreadsheet before, and now everything is unhidden. So I did share the link in the chat box here, so I think, Jill, you're in it. Someone else is in it as well. So if you want to play around with it, you can see it there. Right now it's set as view only, so if you want to play around with it and actually look at the formulas and change things, you'll have to make your own copy, and I'll just show that real quick in case. So you'll go to File and click on Make a Copy. You'll be asked to rename it, and then rename it however you like, and then it'll be opened up as if you're editing. But you won't be editing my version. You'll be editing your own version so that this stays intact on my blog. Jill, do you have any questions? Jill's another Docs TC.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Because you turned me off before.
Yeah, there was some background noise. It kept popping your screen up, so I muted you. Sorry.
No, I need to sit down and take a copy, work through it carefully, and get my head around it.
Yeah, this was.
I mean, I agree with you that how you lay it out is very important, and you can make things much easier by having things in the proper columns. And also that, as you say, we can have several different answers on the forum to the same question. I don't know what the users make of that.
I know for me, that's where I learn the most, because I'll come up with some answer, and then Yogi and Adam will come up with some answer, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I would never have thought of that, but that is awesome.
Yeah. I just refer them all to Yogi now.
Yeah. Yes,
good call.
It's great.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good prototype anyway. So maybe in the future we could, focus, converge our focus on one issue in the forum, or if anybody wants to comment on your blog for future hangouts.
Yeah, so feel free to comment on my blog. I know Google Docs reshared our post here, so if you want to comment on there, we'll see it there. And then you can also comment on either my or Adam's Google Plus as well. If there's a certain video or function that you'd like to talk about, and we could probably talk about these things for forever and get into arguments as to why you want to use something else or whatever. But it's all in the fun, and we're all here to help each other learn and help people out. So
when you guys were looking at this in this Hangout, was the actual screen clear? Because I'm looking at it on my Chromebook, and it was quite small, and it was very difficult to see exactly what was going on until I switched to the spreadsheet itself.
Yeah, so that's something I'll definitely do in the future is make sure to share the spreadsheet in the chat so people can follow along that way. I know right now I have two 24-inch monitors set up, so everything I can see is fine. I know Adam has a big display as well. But with the one we tested before, once it uploads to YouTube, it does get a little bit clearer. So you might be able to see things if you watch it on YouTube once it once it's live, and I think the first like 30 or 45 seconds were kind of blurry, but it gets better, so stick with it.
So you
I just use a bigger screen.
Yeah.
You can share the docs. You can share the top docs up the top, Jill, and just have the doc opened in your screen. But I guess the screen share just allows us to see our cursor and our edits and what have you when we're editing the formula where you don't. So yeah, my visibility was fine, but like Ted, I'm 1920 by 1080 or whatever it is. So.
Well, here, Jill, we can test it real quick. I'll share this and tell me what you can see.
I can see Adam leaving the room.
Adam's leaving the room. So here, what you can do is I can change the zoom settings in Chrome so that things get better, but then you get this red bar saying, "Oh, we're not supported," blah blah blah.
Yeah, I see that a lot.
So is that better?
A little bit. It's just that it's only taking up part of the screen, and because I'm using the Chromebook, I'm on a small screen.
Gotcha.
I mean, I'll look at the video later on the bigger screen on the desktop.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing we'll have to play around with to figure out how we can make that better. And I think that's one good feature that Google Spreadsheets is missing is that ability to zoom in on certain cells, like you can in Excel. So that this would be a great use case for that to actually be a feature.
It would indeed.
Maybe we can.
But also the way it's laid out, I see there's the top 3/4 of the screen has the spreadsheet in it, and then there's the bar at the bottom with the videos of you and me and Adam and a little, like a thumbnail of the spreadsheet. It would be nice if you could, click to maximize, have the whole screen showing the spreadsheet in some way. I don't know how to do that.
I think the best thing you could do would be maximize the Hangout window and then make sure you're clicked on by clicking on the thumbnail below. Whoever click on the spreadsheet, and then it'll stay up there, and that'll probably be your best chance at getting it to be the biggest you can. I know for me, as I resize this window, it also changes what it looks like. So I was playing around trying to find the best, zoom settings to get it to work, but
it's partly the size thing, but it seems to be quite blurry. So sometimes, then it goes clear as if you focused it, and then it goes blurry again. Maybe because the internet connection's not very good.
Yeah, that's definitely a connectivity issue. I see the same thing though. As I move it around, I guess it blurs a little bit, and then that time it didn't. But
okay.
All right. Well, I'm gonna end the broadcast. Thank you for watching. I can see there were some people watching on YouTube, so thank you for watching. And if you have any questions about anything, you can always go to the forums. If you'd like any other questions about spreadsheets in particular that you'd like to see us do some more talks on functions, put them in the comments and add us to the circles, and you'll be able to see when we are doing these again.
Okay, well, thank you for setting it up. Bye.
Thanks, Ted. Bye-bye.
See you guys.